For decades, a single terrifying truth echoed across the Mediterranean basin. The fleet of the Ottoman Empire was unstoppable. From the conquest of Constantinople to the fall of Rhodes, the Sultan's navy swept westward, asserting complete dominance over critical trade routes and coastal strongholds. European powers watched in terror as the Islamic Empire extended its reach. By the middle of the 16th century, the Mediterranean threatened to become an Ottoman lake, leaving Christian Europe fractured, defensive, and desperate. Yet, on October 7, 1571, that perception vanished forever in a single day of unprecedented violence. Off the coast of western Greece, in the Gulf of Patras, two colossal armadas collided in a battle that would decide the fate of regional hegemony. When the smoke finally cleared, the myth of Ottoman invincibility lay shattered beneath the waves, fundamentally altering the trajectory of naval warfare and shifting the global balance of power. The catalyst for this historic confrontation was the Ottoman siege of Cyprus in 1570. Cyprus was a prized Venetian colony whose fall threatened the economic lifelines of Western Europe. Recognizing that isolated responses would only invite total defeat, Pope Pius V rallied a coalition of Catholic maritime states. This alliance, known as the Holy League, brought together the naval forces of Spain, Venice, the Papal States, Genoa, and Malta into a unified coalition. Command of this fragile, politically fractured alliance was entrusted to Don Juan of Austria, the 24-year-old half-brother of King Philip II of Spain. Don Juan faced an extraordinary tactical dilemma. He had to unite rival Italian and Spanish fleets, maintain discipline among thousands of mercenaries, and force a decisive battle before the fragile coalition dissolved under internal jealousies. His vision was aggressive and uncompromising. Seek out the enemy fleet and destroy it entirely. Opposing him was Ali Pasha, the Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy, commanding a force of roughly 250 warships. The vast majority of both fleets consisted of galleys, long, sleek vessels propelled by oars and equipped with forward-facing cannons. Galley warfare had defined Mediterranean combat for millennia, emphasizing speed, ramming maneuvers, and fierce hand-to-hand boarding actions that transformed ships into floating wooden platforms for infantry combat. However, Don Juan brought a revolutionary technological asset to the Battle of Lepanto: 6 massive Venetian galleasses. These heavy vessels were essentially floating fortresses, lower than ships of the line, but vastly broader and taller than standard galleys. Packed with heavy artillery along their broadsides, the tactical doctrine focuses on a monumental shift toward gunpowder-driven naval engagements, capable of breaking an enemy formation before a single boarder leaped across the bulwarks. Don Juan anchored these 6 galleasses in front of his main battle line, deploying them as an immovable shield across the Gulf. Ottoman strategists, accustomed to maneuvering around traditional galley lines, vastly underestimated the devastating range and explosive power of these floating batteries. Ali Pasha believed his superior speed and numerical advantage in standard galleys would allow his oarsmen to bypass the heavy beasts and engulf the Holy League's line. As the Ottoman fleet advanced in a massive crescent, the trap sprung. The heavy cannons of the galleasses roared, tearing through the wooden hulls of the advancing Ottoman galleys and scattering their tightly packed formations. Confusion swept through the Sultan's front ranks as ships splintered and sank long before reaching boarding distance. The precise, devastating artillery broadsides threw the entire Ottoman center into chaos before the main lines even collided. Despite the initial carnage inflicted by the galleasses, the primary battle lines inevitably collided in a deafening crush of splintering timber and iron. The Gulf of Patras ceased to be a maritime theater. It instantly transformed into a massive, undulating infantry battlefield. Hundreds of galleys rammed and locked their oars together, forming an artificial landmass of floating wreckage where momentum died and desperate hand-to-hand combat began. Here, the fundamental military doctrines of two empires clashed face to face. Ottoman marines, relying on the devastating speed and accuracy of the composite bow, unleashed clouds of arrows intended to sweep the enemy decks clear, but they met a formidable technological countermeasure. The Holy League forces were heavily armored, utilizing boarding netting and the sheer stopping power of massed arquebus fire to shatter the Ottoman boarding parties before they could secure a solid foothold. Yet, the sheer scale of the engagement left vulnerabilities, and on the Ottoman left wing, the cunning Corsair commander Uluj Ali identified a critical weakness. Recognizing the rigid, heavy formation of the Christian fleet, he initiated a brilliant, sweeping flanking maneuver to the south. This calculated deception lured the Genoese admiral Gianandrea Doria out of his assigned position, effectively baiting him into extending the Holy League's line too far. A terrifying gap suddenly tore open in the southern flank. Uluj Ali immediately pivoted his agile Corsair vessels, driving them straight through the fractured Christian defenses. It was a masterstroke of naval opportunism, one that threatened to roll up the entire Holy League center from behind. If this rapid envelopment succeeded, the tactical advantage of the heavy floating batteries would be entirely negated, and the tide of the battle would brutally snap back in favor of the Sultan. Yet, the brutal discipline of the Christian infantry, combined with the devastating short-range musketry of Spanish arquebusiers, contained the breakthrough. In the center, Don Juan's flagship, the Real, locked horns in a death match with Ali Pasha's Sultana. For hours, soldiers surged back and forth across the blood-soaked decks in brutal melee combat until Ali Pasha was slain, and the Holy League raised its banner over the Ottoman flagship. The death of their Grand Admiral shattered Ottoman morale, turning a fierce struggle into a rout. Over 200 Ottoman vessels were captured or destroyed, while tens of thousands of experienced sailors, rowers, and elite janissaries were lost in a matter of hours. The Holy League also liberated over 12,000 Christian galley slaves, striking a devastating blow to the Empire's trained maritime manpower. The victory was overwhelming, but its true significance went far beyond the immediate tactical destruction of the Sultan's fleet. News of the victory rapidly spread across Europe, triggering wild celebrations and monumental artistic commemorations. For generations, European states had lived under the psychological shadow of inevitable Ottoman conquest. Now that spell was broken forever. Strategically, the battle marked the absolute limit of Ottoman territorial expansion in the Mediterranean basin. While the Sultan possessed the vast wealth and resources required to rebuild a replacement fleet within a single year, the empire could not easily replace the irreplaceable. Thousands of veteran commanders, skilled archers, and seasoned oarsmen had perished on that bloody day. Furthermore, Lepanto demonstrated that the era of traditional galley combat was drawing to a close, yielding to the dominant doctrine of broadside gunnery. The overwhelming success of the galleass proved that naval victory would henceforth belong to heavily armed, sail-driven warships rather than oar-powered ramming vessels. The focus of global naval power was permanently shifting away from the Mediterranean and toward the open Atlantic Ocean. Had the Holy League fractured or suffered defeat at Lepanto, the consequences for Mediterranean history would have been profound. An Ottoman victory would have left Italy, Sicily, and southern Spain completely exposed to naval invasions and relentless coastal raids, potentially accelerating the Islamic Empire's expansion deep into the heart of Western Europe. Instead, the triumph established a strategic stalemate that stabilized the Mediterranean into distinct spheres of influence. The Ottoman Empire retained its dominant holdings in the eastern Mediterranean, including Cyprus, but it abandoned its ambitious strategic campaigns to conquer the Western Sea. The Western Basin became a sphere dominated by Spanish and Italian maritime power. Among those who fought and bled in the chaos was a young Spanish soldier named Miguel de Cervantes, who lost the use of his left hand in the fighting. Decades later, the author of Don Quixote would describe the clash as the most noble occasion that past or present ages had ever seen, capturing the profound cultural weight the battle held for those who survived it. Naval theorists and historians would study the maneuvers at Lepanto for centuries, recognizing it as the last major fleet engagement fought primarily with oar-propelled galleys. It stood as a pivotal bridge between medieval boarding actions and modern artillery-driven naval warfare, reshaping how empires built, equipped, and deployed their fleets across the world's oceans. While the immediate operational gains for the Holy League were limited by internal diplomatic rivalries that prevented a follow-up invasion of Ottoman territory, the psychological shift was permanent. The Ottoman Navy would never again inspire the same existential dread that had paralyzed European strategic planning for more than a century. In the broader arc of global history, the engagement at Lepanto stands as a monumental divide, an era shifted by the calculated risks of Don Juan of Austria and the firepower of the Venetian galleasses. It proved that organized European coalitions, leveraging emerging military technology, could decisively halt the westward expansion of a seemingly invincible imperial superpower. Ultimately, the 1571 battle ended a century of psychological dominance and redrew the geopolitical map of the Mediterranean world. The shattered hulks that sank into the Gulf of Patras carried with them the myth of Ottoman invincibility, signaling the dawn of a new age where naval supremacy would be defined not by traditional galley ramming, but by gunpowder, tactical innovation, and global sea power.